Now recording. Go for.
Okay, I just wanted to take a second to thank the SRT committee who puts in time organizing these SRTs. Today, I'll be discussing auditory conscious perception, how we are covertly detecting it, and the brain networks involved. Just a brief outline, I'll explain how we're isolating the neural correlates of consciousness, previous findings from our lab, and then 3 aims that include determining the I metrics of perception, utilizing them for machine learning to detect perception, and then the brain signals involved. We'll have discussion, future directions, and then hopefully time for questions. So this graphic from Blumenfeld 2021 distinguishes the neural mechanisms of consciousness itself, indicated by the red arrow, from other mechanisms that may precede or follow consciousness, but aren't strictly speaking part of consciousness. The precursors include alertness, awareness, and attention. And then the consequences, depending on the environment in which the conscious percept is being perceived, include working memory, decision-making, and motor planning. In the Blumenfeld lab, we study conscious perception, and these are the neural mechanisms of the conscious event itself. So previous research in the realm of consciousness has relied on overt report, and that is the need to ask the subject, did you perceive the face on the screen? Did you perceive the sound? Or did you perceive the vibration of a tactor? And that reliance on report has biased this consciousness research towards the correlates of perceptual report rather than consciousness itself. And this work from Sharif Kronemer from our lab demonstrates the difference in visual perception between report and no report. So these are from high density EEG, and you can see that the ERP van at an earlier time point is present in both report and no report trials, and not present, and then P2 and P3 at the later time points is not present for no report trials. And so these differences persist even when report is delayed by several seconds. So the issue is not that we're giving the stimulus and then asking too quickly, thereby confounding the brain signals with report. It's actually that the participant in preparation with the knowledge that they will later be reporting their perception have different brain signals associated. So my aims are to identify I-metric signals associated with auditory perception, utilize them to develop a machine learning model to detect auditory perception. And then once we have this purified form of auditory perception, to then identify the true brain signals with fMRI. These 2 videos are examples of the I metrics, one of them, an important one, being pupil dilation. Here you can see we use eye-link. The subject's head is resting on a chin rest, and their pupil expands in the presence of an auditory stimulus and then goes back to normal when it's no longer there. We also do eye tracking, which looks at X and Y position on the screen, and then also looks at blinks and microsaccades, which are small jerk-like movements associated with fixation. And so this is the screen, and the blue dots would be their fixation point. So our hypothesis is that pupil dilation will increase as well as blinks, and microsaccades or eye movement will decrease in the presence of a true perceived auditory stimulus. The reason for this hypothesis is from the visual paradigm, you can see here that perceived stimuli have an increase in pupil dilation and blinks and a decrease in eye movement. So how we're going to do this is to hold sensory input constant while observing how consciousness fluctuates. And the way to achieve this is using an at-threshold stimulus. We have two ears, and then for the right ear in this example, it's considered the target ear. And so the subject is told that they will be asked if they heard a sound, and if so, which sound they heard, whistle, laser, or water drop. They're also told that they'll be sounds in the other ear, but that they will not be asked questions about that. Then for the target ear stimuli, we ask them, did you hear the sound, yes or no? And for confirmed perceived, that means, yes, I heard the sound, and they continue to then get the sound correct, or no, I did not hear the sound, and then the sound is incorrect. So similar to blind sight, we can have deaf hearing where someone says, no, I didn't hear a sound, but when they guess, they get it correctly. And so just to confirm that they truly did not perceive it, we ask them to identify one of the three possible sounds. This generates two data sets. We have report trials and no report trials. The report trials have been categorized by us into confirmed perceived and not perceived. And then we use machine learning to replace report for the no report trials. We'll have the 5 features from the eye metrics we collected, including pupil diameter, time series analysis of pupil diameter, a blink binary, a microsaccade binary, and then X and Y gaze. These are fed into 3 base models. The optimal ones in the visual paradigm were a decision tree, linear SVM, and a Gaussian SVM. The confidence scores from these models are then fed into a stacked ensemble SVM, linear SVM, from which we then classify the no report stimuli as perceived or not perceived. And this is how we're able to determine if our auditory stimuli was perceived or not perceived without needing to ask the subject. So we have 9 subjects of pilot data. This is an example of what they'd see on the screen and their options for answering. And then what we ended up having was about 2,200 trials that could be categorized as either CP or CNP, but 75% were confirmed perceived. What this leads to is a heavily biased model in which 75% of them are one class. And so what we're finding thus far with this pilot data is that the classifier, which is optimized to be highly accurate, is actually just classifying everything as confirmed perceived and nothing as CNP, and then it's 75% accurate. But in terms of eye metrics themselves, this is our auditory paradigm response versus the previous visual paradigm response I showed earlier. You can see that there is a clear difference in pupil dilation from confirmed perceived auditory stimuli, which is interesting because it's not visual stimuli, so it's easy to expect changes in eye metrics for visual, but it occurs also in auditory and from our lab also in tactile. So there's a large change in pupil diameter, a smaller one in blink, and then we're not seeing much for microsaccades, but again, we only have 9 subjects. So the last aim will be to identify the brain signals associated with auditory perception, and that's without overt report. So we have 3 perceptual contrasts: those that are categorized as perceived by the subject's report, those that were classified as perceived by our machine learning model, and then those that were not perceived whatsoever. And our hypothesis, based again on the visual data, is that early responses in the detection, arousal, and salience network sites, including the primary auditory cortex, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, thalamus, and midbrain, will distinguish all perceived from all not perceived. And then you can see here at the later time points, around 6 seconds, that there'll be decreases in activity for no report perceived trials associated with the DMN, including the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and the parietal posterior cingulate cortex. So what we will do in the future is to adjust the subject-specific auditory thresholds so that we're getting 50-50 CP to CNP. Right now it's calculated on heard versus not heard, which is not quite what we're looking for. And so in the future, we're hoping to have a more balanced data set for our model. If this pipeline can be used for both auditory and visual, it has the potential to be widely used to study purified conscious perception. And this will help with the overestimation of what is the true neurocorrelates of consciousness. And also, it will help with those with disorders of consciousness, such as epilepsy or non-responsive patients who might be unable to communicate verbally. So in the future, we will adjust that threshold to be CP and CNP. We're also working to optimize our auditory paradigm for fMRI. As you might know, the auditory conditions within the scanner are quite different to not in the scanner. So we're working to make sure that our pilot data is tested under those conditions. And we're collecting new pilot data. So if you're interested, please feel free to send us an email at attentions.study@yale.edu. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my lab members, including Hal and Sharif, my cohort, and the entire Blumenfeld lab.
Clapping really loudly. Wow. And a bunch of other people are clapping too, including Charlie, who has the final say. Okay, Shanae, that was fantastic timing. Wow, I think you're the first person this entire year who we didn't have to send a reminder to. Wow. Okay, so you all to walk away with that award. We have a full 3 minutes for questions. If anyone has any burning questions for Shanae.
Hi, this is Amy. I enjoyed that a lot. Given the auditory challenges in the MR, would it be better to do another sense like vision?
So this has been done, and in fact, much of consciousness research has been done in the visual paradigm. It's just very well understood, and so that's the reason for that. You know, there's different types of consciousness. You can be conscious of perception, or you can be conscious of your own movement, or you can even be conscious of your thoughts. And so conscious awareness of stimuli is sort of the E. coli of consciousness research. And what we'd like to prove with my thesis work is that we can make a machine learning model that is attributable or useful in many sensory modalities. So vision was successfully done by Sharif, and I'd like to demonstrate that it's possible in auditory. But the reason we're using fMRI is because we're really interested in including those subcortical arousal networks that we wouldn't see with EEG alone.
Thank you. I think I had missed that early bit.
Okay, I have a quick question, and then we'll move to the next person. Shanae, have you considered like other types of machine learning models, or are you sticking with like SVMs? And if so, why?
Yeah, so I know that the lab went through several types of machine learning models, and we do have a decision tree in here, but the reason for these models being chosen is because they were optimal. I think the first time we tried, they were all SVMs, and then the decision tree actually strengthened the model in terms of accuracy, but also retention. So it would be great if we could exactly use the model that vision worked well with onto auditory and tactile and the other senses. But if not, then sort of this procedure or paradigm for classifying stimuli as perceived or not perceived could be utilized and then optimized based on, you know, your specific perception paradigm. So these I will attempt to use first, but if they don't work, my main goal is to perceive well or to predict well auditory perception.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we'll move to the next person. Fantastic job, Shanae. Wait, let me also stop